National Treasury has released the 2022 Draft Revenue Laws Amendment Bill, which contains amendments that are set to enable South Africans to save for non-retirement purposes via their retirement fund savings. Currently, in order for workers to get access to their retirement savings, they need to resign from their place of employment. National Treasury has proposed a so-called two-pot retirement system, which will enable longer-term retirement savings on the one hand and ability to tap onto funds where necessary on the other. Well, to unpack this issue for us, I'm joined by John Anderson. He's the Head of Investments, Products and Enablement at AlexForbes. Thanks very much, John, for joining us. In basic terms, what is the two-pot retirement system and what's its ultimate goal?
Sure. No, thank you very much. So for a number of years, as we know, when people get to retirement, they don't have sufficient income. And the stats typically are that, less than 6% of individuals have sufficient income to sustain themselves in retirement. And for every 100 Rand that you have before retirement, when you retire, you only have 31 cents in the Rand. So a huge reduction in income. And one of the biggest reasons for that, it's not because people don't save, it's because when they do save through an occupational scheme with their employer, when they change jobs, 90% of people actually take the money and then they restart the savings again. So they don't give compound interest time to build up. So to solve for that problem, National Treasury has been on a consultation process over the last while and made certain announcements at the beginning of the year with the budget speech. And they've followed it up now with a bit more concrete detail. And what they're proposing is to introduce a two-pot system. So basically what would happen is that when you have your 100 Rand that you're saving towards retirement, 2/3 goes towards a retirement pot, and you can't touch that ever. So that's always until you get to retirement. So it must always be preserved, getting the returns to get you there. The other 1/3 of your 100 Rand goes into a savings pot that's invested alongside your retirement pot, and you can access that at any time, but with limits. There's once per annum limit, and also there needs to be at least 2,000 Rand in that. And what they're trying to do, and that'll only apply for all your money being saved from 1 March 2023, everything up to that point will still be treated the same as it is today. So essentially what you do is a greater proportion of your money gets preserved for retirement, and you can get access at any point. And that's a key thing that came through with COVID and the lockdown. People couldn't access money for emergencies because it was in their, the retirement legislation doesn't allow it. So at the same time, they're trying to allow for short-term access for the next potential pandemic or emergency that comes around.
Yeah. So, John, these are currently amendments that are being tabled and they still need further consultation. So when realistically do you think this would come into effect?
Well, yeah, you're quite right. So there's comments are open till the end of this month, or the 29th of August. And then after that, it'll go through a process and ultimately through Parliament. And then, your amendments need to be then gazetted and made available. Now, that needs to happen. And then the other thing is that I think through the consultation process, Treasury has indicated that look at the practicalities with administrators, the industry, all the processes that need to take place. At this stage, they've indicated an ambitious target date of 1 March 2023, so that the new system applies from that date. Indications, though, are from a practicalities point of view that that's quite ambitious and it may need to be postponed by maybe a year, but we'll have to see through the consultation process. But we know between now and March, nothing will change. And at best, from 1 March next year, we'll see the change. But and at worst, maybe a year after that, given the practicalities.
Yeah. So, John, given what you know so far, as far as you understand, what would the tax implications be for tapping onto that 1/3 of money, for emergency purposes? And would you also have to go through an application system whereby you have to justify why you're tapping onto those funds?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the Treasury note went into quite a bit of detail around the tax treatment, and I think that's been quite a big debate, whether it should be treated the same as a normal withdrawals. But you know, through the consultation process, they've decided that the 1/3 in your savings pot, if you do access it, it'll be counting towards your income for that specific income tax year, and you will then pay marginal tax on that. So what would need to happen is you'd need to go through an application with SARS, a directive, and then also include that in your income declaration for the year and pay it marginal tax. For all your monies accumulated to 28 Feb 2023, assuming that the date doesn't change, the tax treatment of those withdrawals on what they call the vested pot, meaning everything up to that date with interest, if you withdraw, you can still withdraw that if you resign or if you get retrenched. And then there's the withdrawal tax table. As it currently stands, that will apply to that money. And then the other thing is that at retirement, the retirement lump sum tax table applies to both your savings pot and your retirement pot together.
John,
so that's the tax, yeah.
John, sorry, I just want to creep in one last question there. Like a credit card, just because you have a facility available, it doesn't mean you have to use it all the time. So the question that I really want to pose to you is, even though this is a facility that may be available to people, what are some of the pitfalls of deciding to tap onto that 1/3 portion?
No, that's a great question. And it really is, it's as you say, this is not supposed to be a day-to-day savings account. It's there if you've exhausted all other sources. And if you really need it in great need, for example, a classic one would have been lockdown with COVID, everybody's salaries get reduced. What do I do? In but that's a once in a couple of years event, and it's quite severe. But for your day-to-day, for example, medical expenses, savings for the end of the year for your holiday, this is not the right vehicle, because also the monies are invested longer term and not on a short-term basis. And also you're going to be paying that marginal tax on it. But there are restrictions, so you can only do it once a year. So once, and I think those restrictions are in place to try and avoid some of the pitfalls you mentioned. But at the end of the day, it's going to be up to each individual to evaluate their own circumstances. But certainly our advice is that pot is really there for a rainy day one day, should not be used as a normal day-to-day. It's not efficient for that. It's really there in an absolute worst case scenario. You should still see both your savings and retirement pots as one for your retirement. You just have access to potentially 1/3 for a big emergency.
Yeah.
You can invest alongside on tax-free savings. Investments are much better, for some of your other goals like housing, for your kids' savings or those types of things. And then you can invest in unit trusts or a range of other things for other needs, but not the retirement. There are limitations, to what it can do. And it's not as flexible in terms of how you can invest it. That's another point.
John, thank you so much for your time and your insights there. John Anderson, he's the Head of Investments, Products and Enablement at AlexForbes. We're going to take a quick break.